Hey there, fellow citizens of the internet. Welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast. Today, I have with me Phyllis Leavitt. I hope I did not butcher that the name. We're going to be talking about therapy today. So without any further ado, Phyllis, welcome to the Moses Kabandana Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. It's just a great opportunity for me to share with you, and hopefully you share with me. So I have been a psychotherapist for over 30 years, and I recently wrote a book called America in Therapy. And the motivation behind writing the book, actually I had the idea for a long time, but the contents actually came together slowly over time, and I just recently finished it, and it's in the process of being published. And the full title of the book is America in Therapy, A New Approach to Hope and Healing for a Nation in Crisis. So the motivation behind my book was that as a therapist of all this time and working with individuals and couples and families and children, it became really clear to me that the dynamics of a family, which is a lot of what we treat, and let me segue here for just a second to say that the family systems approach to therapy today, which I think is probably the most prevalent one, is that we are not islands. We are all conditioned by and influenced by the family systems we live in, and the role models of behavior, the roles of men and women, how conflict is negotiated, what is expected of us, what are the rewards and consequences for the behaviors that we're expected to and the things we're supposed to do. What are the models around how you deal with depression or emotion, anger? All of these things we learn from the family systems that we're in. And while people might be born with their own individual nature, someone might be more naturally a little bit more of an introvert, or more naturally more of an extrovert, or more naturally a little more aggressive, or more naturally a little passive, we also really learn how to behave from the people around us. And in a healthy family, there's good boundaries, there's peaceful conflict resolution, there's tolerance of our differences, there's a desire to repair relationships when there's disruption, and so forth. There's love, there's a sense of belonging, there's encouragement and support, all of those things. And what we see in the world of psychotherapy is all of the dynamics of dysfunctional and abusive families, and that's a lot of what we treat, because that's a lot of what brings people to therapy, is the pain from dysfunctional family dynamics. And a big thing that, and I'm not alone in this, is to know that family systems operate outside the family as well. They operate in the workplace, they operate in schools, they operate in businesses, they operate in places of worship, they operate in government. And what motivated me to write my book was seeing that some of the most dysfunctional family dynamics that we know and treat as psychotherapists are actually playing out on very high levels of family organization that influence thousands and millions of people. And in a nutshell, to say that what's causing great alarm, I think, in America and really all over the world, but I speak to America because I live here, is that many of the dynamics of the most powerful in the most powerful businesses and the most powerful heads of government are operating on abuse family dynamics and hurting millions of people and causing lasting damage that then has its own cycle of repetition that I'm not sure everyone is aware of. And so that's half of why I wrote the book. The other half is, what do we know from the world of psychotherapy and psychology that helps break the cycle of abuse and helps people heal? So that's my book in a nutshell.
Wow. Okay. Well, thank you for that summary. First question that rose to mind as you were giving me the summary there of why you wrote the book. It's what is the most common in your opinion? Okay. Well, let me backtrack a little bit. One of the reasons that I have you on this podcast is because I'm often interested in having conversations with people that have been doing something that is relatively difficult across time, right? And you've been a psychotherapist for 30 years. I think that's quite a minute, right?
A long
to say
time.
the least.
Yeah.
That's a very long minute. So you've seen, you've walked the walk, so to speak, right? 30 years is a long time to be doing something competently. That is something that is difficult. So I want to emphasize that first, and then follow with the question of, in these 3 decades, what would you say is the most common misconception that people have about therapy?
Oh, yes. I mean, there's probably many, but I think the most common misconception is that it's a sign of weakness, that there's a stigma attached to doing therapy, that you shouldn't need emotional help. You shouldn't need to express a lot of emotion or cry or get comforted.
Yeah.
And in fact, all of my years as a therapist and as a client myself, I've done a lot of therapy myself as a client, have shown me that it actually takes enormous strength to come to therapy. It takes enormous courage to delve into your own conditioning and to rework some of the patterns in your life that aren't working. People come to therapy because something is not working in their life, some pattern that they keep repeating, some pain that they keep experiencing, some way that they're not in relationship with other people that is satisfying, that is loving, that is fulfilling, that is safe. And so it takes a lot of courage to look at, where did I come from? What happened to me? And also, what have I done that is not working for me? Most of us, have a little bit easier time talking about what happened to us that hurt. It's a little harder to talk about the ways we might have hurt other people. And most of us have both,
Right.
Not necessarily that the average person is an abuser, but we've all acted out our pain in some way, either by being unavailable or being very angry or being super critical or, rejecting, whatever it is. And so I just want to emphasize that it takes courage to do that. And that's what I'm asking of America, that we have the courage to look at where we came from, look at what conditioned us for better or for worse, and be accountable for ourselves now in the ways that we treat each other.
Yeah. Thank you for that answer. Cowardness / fear / weakness seems to be playing a major role into why people, just one, don't even consider therapy. But you're saying that it takes the exact opposite strength, right? It's not like you're weak. You have to be really, really strong to seek out emotional help and health. One of the things that puzzles me about the species that we are, and in relation to pain in therapy, is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, based on your 30 years of experience in this field, most of us, the biggest or the most amount of pain that we have ever felt has come directly or indirectly from someone that is close to us and or someone that is supposed to be close to us.
Yes. And or people that we depend on that become undependable and hurtful, that we actually really depend on for maybe even our life. But yes, the worst pain that comes, that I think is at the root of all human dysfunction, is pain inflicted by other people, and especially people that we're close to, and especially people we depend on. Children, for instance, depend on their parents. They just do.
Right.
They depend on their teachers. But let's just start with parents. If parents are, suffering from addiction or rage, or they're absent, or they're depressed and unavailable, it directly affects the well-being of their children. And you can't, and then children become symptomatic is what happens. And that's a lot of the children that I saw. In fact, I would say 99% of the children that I saw for therapy, who were kind of the identified patient in their family, there was nothing wrong with them. They were suffering from the dysfunction of their families, and especially their parents, and especially if the parents were in a lot of conflict with each other. It just tore kids apart, and they became symptomatic. They had a hard time in school. They had difficulty making friends. They became withdrawn. They had a lot of fears. They became super aggressive. And this is also happening to adults who are
Mm.
mistreated in the family of America. They
Yeah.
become symptomatic. And then what happens in an abusive, not very well educated environment is that then people are blamed for their symptoms. Why are you so
Mm.
aggressive? Why did that guy punch somebody when he got angry? Well, yes,
Yeah.
he is responsible, or she is responsible for their behavior, but we have to somehow hold responsibility for our own behavior in some kind of balance with what we're providing people as a family system in the home,
Mm.
in the community, in the state, and in the country.
Yeah. Yeah. Why are you addressing America as a country and not starting it at the individual level? Or and this is an assumption that I'm making that you're not starting at the individual level. You're addressing the country as a whole. What's the importance in it?
Well, two things. I mean, I think I'm addressing both. So
Okay.
I'm using what I learned about the individual level, the individual person and the individual family system as the lens through which I'm looking at what's happening in the family of America. And the
Mm.
reason why I'm looking through that lens at the family of America is because I think what's happening in our country right now is very scary. I think that the dynamics
Mm.
of abuse coming down from the most powerful positions, many, not all, in our government and in our largest
Mm.
institutions is targeting the most vulnerable among us, targeting the marginalized people, and reenacting the dynamics of abuse that we find in individual families, which is finding targets to take the responsibility off of yourself for what you're doing,
Mm.
then blaming your victims for their symptoms, and um, enrolling other people in blaming your victims for their symptoms. So we're
Okay.
producing, um, so in other words, and we're role modeling from the top down now extreme divisiveness, threats of violence, threats of civil war, increasing divide between the rich and the poor. I read
Yeah.
an article just the other day that child poverty in the United States has doubled in the last year. This is a
Mm.
responsibility of the family of America. And we tend to put the responsibility on the poor,
Right.
which is
Right.
blaming our victims.
Mm. Mm. Now, uh, what would you say to the I don't know if pushback is the right word, but let's assume that there is an accurate observation, and that observation is saying that the American populace over the last 30 years has increasingly become, let's just say, soft, for the lack of a better word. Uh,
Well,
what's
can you
is
explain
that
what that
probably
means? I'm not sure what you mean by the word soft. Can you just help me understand
let,
what that means?
yeah. So if you spend the right amount of time in certain circles of the internet, you might run into um, soft, meaning that people are easily hurt. Something that didn't hurt psychologically or physically 30 years ago, it's now a reason to seek protection of sorts or therapy. Um, One is that I guess the question that I'm asking here is over the last 30 years, are you seeing more and more people seeking therapy or less and less people seeking therapy? Is the stigmatization of therapy going up? Is it going down? Like, well, what are you observing there?
I think the stigmatization is still there. I think it is less overall. I think therapy
Okay,
is more talked about by celebrities, by people
right.
in positions of influence. So, yes, I do think
Okay,
that there's less of a stigma, but I think the stigma is still very, very high in some segments of our population. And even if the stigma
okay,
around therapy isn't talked about, the stigma
yeah.
around being vulnerable is, you know.
Can you expand
So
on it?
yeah, I think that, we have this sort of American dream thing of pull yourself up by your bootstraps, be tough.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of idealization around the idea of I'm independent, I'm a self made person, I can do it on my
Mm.
own. when in fact, nobody can do it on their own. We are totally dependent on all the systems all over the world to give us electricity, to give us power, to give us food, to give us, everything that we need, the infrastructure that creates our roads, the auto workers that make the cars. We're 100% dependent, but we've maintained this strange ideal of independence, and we've made it really sexy. And so to be vulnerable is still taboo in large sections of our population and still attributed to being more feminine than masculine, when in fact our little boys are just as being just as hurt as our little girls, and have just as many tears and pain inside of them as the feminine does. And and certainly there is more permission for men to be vulnerable. I do think that, but again, I don't think it spreads to the images we have or to the entire population by any means.
Okay. What role are schools playing into, I guess, therapy in general? Like, are there systems in place for students to receive something that closely resembles therapy during school or like through the school?
Yeah, I don't know exactly how many of all the schools in America have that, but yes, there are school counselors now. Many schools offer groups for children who are grieving, or they offer programs around bullying. But I know for a fact from some of the clients that I've worked with that a lot of bullying is still going on, a lot of racial discrimination is still going on, a lot of poverty discrimination is still going on. So yes, there's more awareness and there's a need for an enormous amount of upgrading. And the thing I want to say about bullying is this. Yes, it's wonderful to have programs that address bullying. And we know now that some kids are committing suicide as a result of the bullying they're receiving from peers. And it's a terrible tragedy. I think what we have to look at, though, and again, these are just trying to highlight some of the reasons why I wrote the book the way I did. We have people in leadership positions who are all over the news, who are bullies, who are talking bully language, who are role modeling this for our young people and our adults and making it okay. So you might have a program over here that's trying to address bullying, and then you have a person in position of power who's bullying their opponent on the nightly news. And
can you give an example or like
well, I don't want to give a specific example, but there's, I think most Americans know that the rhetoric is very hostile, and there are personal attacks coming from one congressman to the other. Well, I can give one example. Representative Ocasio-Cortez was bullied on the steps of the Capitol, and no one stopped it. The witnesses, no one stood up for her. And when she reported it to the news, she was bullied on some of the news stations. So, that's just one example. People have, targeted their, that's a good example. I'll stop with that. But these are the role models our children are hearing. After Trump was first indicted, there were threats of civil war going all over the media. These things are terrifying. Because what happens in war? Thousands upon thousands of innocent men, women, children, and babies are killed.
Right.
These are mental health issues. So what I'm saying in my book is, let's look at what's happening through the lens of the good psychology rather than keep on believing that these are partisan issues. They're not partisan issues. They're mental health issues. Mentally healthy people don't bully other people. They don't make death threats. They don't.
Okay.
Mentally healthy people don't starve some of the people in their family. Mentally healthy people don't shoot innocent people who are unarmed. They don't. So these are mental health issues.
Yeah. So how do you distinguish, and this is coming from a genuine, intellectual curiosity side of it. So it's like, how do you distinguish someone that is bullying, for the sake of this conversation, that is bullying another person versus someone that is pushing back against an idea or an ideal that they oppose?
Yeah.
Either on the political stage or either the
Right,
political stage or just day-to-day life.
right. It's a really important question because I think if there's one thing that we don't know how to handle as human beings, it's conflict. We
Right.
don't know how to handle it. We still very much have a win-lose paradigm. I'm going to beat
Mm.
you in this argument. I'm going to
Yeah.
show
Yeah.
you that you're wrong. I'm going to humiliate you or silence you or whatever I do because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
believe that I'm right. And not
Mm.
everybody operates on that principle, but a lot of what's going on that's in the news is operating on that principle. And that's still the role model that many of us grew up with and are still receiving. And the difference
Mm.
in really good psychotherapy is, of course, we're going to disagree. I don't think it's
Yeah.
in the nature of human beings that we're all ever going to agree on everything. I think it's impossible. I also don't even
Yeah.
know if it's healthy. I think we need different points of view to look from
Right.
different angles at whatever the issue is. So the point is not to eliminate disagreement, which I think bullies try to do.
Mm.
Whoever disagrees, I'm going to destroy or silence or
Yeah.
humiliate or put down or discredit or jail or kill.
Mm.
Um, what the difference with really good psychology and psychotherapy is, we get to disagree in a safe place where both people get to be heard, both sides get to be heard, and the goal is not for one person to win. The goal is for us to come to some kind of agreement. The goal is for us to repair our relationship so we can continue to function together, even if we have to
Mm.
agree to disagree on something. That's the whole basis of healthy psychotherapy. The basis of healthy psychotherapy is to repair our broken relationships. And the way I see politics playing out a lot in America and in all over the world, many places all over the world, not all places, is still a win-lose paradigm. I'm going to beat you, I'm going to silence you, and I'll jail you if I
Mm.
need to, or I'll lie
Mm.
about you if I need to,
Right. Right.
instead
Right.
of repairing the all so that we can live together in harmony, so that our children can grow up in some kind of peace and safety.
Mm. Mm. Well, speaking of peace and safety, well, I haven't lived that long, so I guess this statement does not come with life experience, but I feel like some sort of adversity and challenge is essential, if not, well, yeah, it's very essential to our growth. And I'm gonna attach that thought with the point that you just made, that we need a place where we can disagree, but in safety, a safe space where we can both exchange ideas and, hey, you're wrong,
Right.
I'm right, you're wrong. But can you have a place like that is too safe, where I feel like if I suppose like what one of the pushbacks would be, I cannot express my points, because if I express my points too strongly, then that makes this space an unsafe space for this kind of so I guess the question is, can you have a space that is too safe, so safe that it becomes counterproductive to the growth that we're trying to aim at?
Well, I don't think we have to worry about it. I think
Ah,
we're so far from that safe space that it's
okay.
not really an option for most people. But I do want to address your
Mm,
issue. I think because I think it's a valid point. Um, I think we're not looking for homogeneity. In other words,
okay.
everything's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
like, I hear you, I have no emotion, it's all good, I love you,
Mm,
I accept you. It's not that. It's
okay.
really like you still get to be angry. You still get to feel strongly about something. There are people out there
Yeah.
who are highly abusive. We have to call out that abuse. It may be very emotional, like you killed
Mm, mm,
someone, or you raped someone,
right.
or you exploited this old person and took their savings. This is
Right.
wrong. We get to have intense emotion, but underneath it, the goal is still repair. How many
Oh,
people,
okay.
does that make sense? So we get to have our emotions. We get to have anger. We do have those feelings. And if someone murders another person, or they rape someone, or they batter their child, we should have strong emotions. That's an appropriate reaction. But what we don't have is the lens on what happened to that person. Why did they kill someone? How did they grow up? What were the role models of conflict resolution in their home? Was somebody an addict? Were they deserted? Did their parents die when they were 2 and they were in an abusive foster care system? Were the role models of coping in their family crime? What happened to that person that set them up to be a dysfunctional member of our human family? And what could we do for them? Even if we have to restrain them because they're a danger, what could we do for them? How could we talk about them in the news? Not like there's this evil monster out there who was a serial killer, which is a horrible thing, a horrible, terrifying thing. But nobody's born a serial killer. What happened to them in the family of America, in the family of their community, in their family of origin, that set them up to go down a road of violence? And equally, what set some people up in their family of origin, in their community, and in their country to become very, very helpless and passive and easily controlled? Because these are psychological dynamics that we understand a lot about, and which I've written about in detail in my book. What sets people up to be either highly aggressive and abusive, or very, very passive and helpless? Because these are the things we need to know if we're going to break the cycle of abuse and violence in our country as well as in our homes.
Okay, that is well put. And so if I can summarize that, and correct me if my summary is off here, you're essentially trying to make the case that we need to focus more on restorative parts.
Absolutely.
So if someone, okay. So maybe start to focus less on the punitive part of, let's say, a crime,
100%.
and shift more towards the restorative part of it. So who are you? What made you who you are? But fundamentally, without taking the responsibility away from the person, right?
That's right. And you know what? That is the hardest balance for us to achieve.
Right.
And that's why I say the work of good psychology and good psychotherapy is not for the faint of heart. To hold that balance between holding someone accountable or holding myself accountable, and look at the origins of my behavior or your behavior, takes incredible psychological strength and courage. It really does. I think it's one of the hardest things for human beings to do. We just want to blame and point fingers, or feel shame and devastated about ourselves.
Yeah. Well, so that leads me to the next segue, which is breaking the cycle. I think you just mentioned that. What does it take? And well, first of all, like how do you identify that you have a cycle? And by cycle here, I'm guessing that it's an intergenerational thing, and or something that you've been doing for a couple of decades or more, and you're trying to get out of that. So, question one, like how do you identify that you have a cycle? 2, how do you identify that the cycle that you have is one that needs to be broken, right? And then 3, how do you go about breaking? Breaking that cycle?
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is, we are born for love and connection. We are social animals. We're born to be connected. And we strive to create some kind of love, connection, meaning and purpose, cooperation in our human relations the best as possible. And when you have an abusive system, the bonds of care between people are damaged and broken. An abuser, someone who's in the mindset of an abuser, is not thinking about their impact and the pain they're causing on the person that they're hurting. They're thinking about what they want out of the system, whether it's sexual abuse, or expressing their rage, or exploitation, or they get to feel powerful because they ostracize somebody. Whatever it is, they're focused on how to maintain their power at whatever cost to their victims. And so in order to break the cycle, we have to identify these things. And we have to look
Okay.
at the power dynamics that are playing in a home and in a country. But help me, I lost the thread of your question, so take me back because I don't want to stray.
Yeah. No, no. So it was how do you identify that you
Oh,
have a
right,
cycle, and then
right,
two, how do you identify that the cycle that you have is one that needs to be broken? Because I feel
right.
like that takes another a more intense introspection, and then how
Right.
do you go about breaking that cycle?
Well, I think the things that tell us that there is a cycle of dysfunction or abuse is that it's repeated, that people are being
Mm,
hurt, that children are being beaten or molested, that people are being starved, that whole segments of our society are being alienated or looked down on as inferior or targeted by the justice
yeah.
system. Um, so, I mean, I think the actions of abuse are pretty obvious. It's when the
Okay.
bonds of our care and connection with each other are broken that allows one element of society, one person to act out on another, and
Mm,
with no consequence, with no stopping it, and no treatment for those who are harmed. Because what our best psychology shows, and again I talk about this in detail in my book, is if people don't get help, if they're not rescued from abuse and violence, if they're not rescued from it and they don't get help, chances are likely that a high percentage of that population is going to carry the dysfunction on to their own families and children in their workplaces. Um, and that's what we're seeing. Look at the
mm,
uptick in mass shootings. We have people who are so disconnected from their own humanity and from their connection to others that they would actually feel the impulse to walk into a first grade class and kill children they don't even know. This is a tip of the iceberg of the mental dysfunction and emotional unwellness that's going on in general in the family of America. And I talk about it that way.
mm.
So we look at
Okay.
what the abuses that are happening in the home, we look at the abuses that are happening in the country, and those are the signs that we have, dysfunction going on, and those are the cycles we need to address and interrupt on all levels.
Mm. Well, so on an individual level, what are
Yeah,
so let's say you are not the aggressor types, and
right.
you have your stuff together, so to speak. You're not out there, trying to cause harm, trying to take advantage of other people. Um, but you are aware that these things do exist and that it could happen to you. So what are some of the things that some of the skill sets, I suppose, emotional skill
Yeah,
sets or psychological skill sets that we can arm ourselves with so that when the abusing types come our way, we can fend ourselves.
yeah. Well, I mean, a big one is calling it out. A big one is
Mm,
identifying it. And I don't mean as an aggressor necessarily, but
yeah,
saying this is abuse, this is neglect.
yeah,
If a parent doesn't feed one of their children, we're pretty quick to say this is an abusive parent, they should be locked up, or they should, get severe help, or their children should be taken away from them, or whatever. But
yeah,
when a country doesn't feed whole segments of its population because they can't make a living wage, or they're homeless and they don't have the means to get what they need to survive, then we have to say the country is responsible, and
mm,
not from an aggressive place, but from saying this needs to change. This needs to be called out. We need to stop silencing our truth tellers, the people who are
mm,
calling out what's happening. Often in a family that's highly dysfunctional and abusive, if a child goes to a teacher or social services and reports abuse, if that child is not protected and believed, they are most likely going to suffer more abuse in the home for having told. And we have people all over the country who are marching for different, social rights and justices, who are being tear gassed, who are being shot at with rubber bullets, who are being jailed, who are being talked about as if they're terrorists, when actually they're speaking truth to the powers that be, that need to be called out for the injustices that they're perpetrating. And we have to know that. We have to make
mm,
it safe for people. actually safe for people to have peaceful protests, to write articles about what's going on that shows the underbelly of some of what we don't want to look at or don't want to acknowledge, or which threatens
Yeah.
the powers that be.
Hmm. What did you say to the pushback here? And I'm trying to process this as we're talking. The pushback that, well, maybe some of those accusations against America don't have a merit, and you have so many people migrating here, right? Therefore, those things that America is being accused of cannot be true. Otherwise, you would not have such an influx of people trying to come in. Is that even a valid pushback at all? Does that even make any sense within this context?
Well, I'm not an expert on immigration, but
Okay.
it seems clear that there are people all over the world who are suffering terribly from political persecution, from religious and ethnic persecution, and from extremes of poverty, who are just looking for a way to survive. And I think the and again, if you have an expert on immigration on your show, they can tell you a lot more than I can. But I think we
Mm,
still look like the land of opportunity to many people who have nothing. And
mm, mm.
we also have a part to play in some of the discord that's going on all over the world. Governments that have been overthrown, whatever,
Yeah, yeah,
that have made people so insecure and so poverty stricken and so desperate that they would risk their lives to go through jungles and cross rivers to save their families, knowing many of whom die along the way.
right,
So
right.
we're really talking here about the family of the world, and
Yeah, yeah,
ultimately
yeah.
that is what we're talking about. I'm just talking about America because I'm not in a
Yep,
position to comment on other countries, but we're really
right.
talking about the family of the world. What are we doing to people that they're fleeing for their lives? And even so, and again, I don't have an answer to the immigration policy, and I'm not schooled in that. But what I would say is we can still treat those people humanely. That is our responsibility. I don't know what that's going to look like, but we don't push innocent children back into the water. We
Right,
don't do that.
right, right.
That is
Yeah,
that is a crime against
yeah.
humanity.
Well, so shifting off from world problems, I wanna get back more towards the individual, because it's at least in my mind, it's pretty hard to solve world problems, but if I have a tentative solution towards a problem that's in my life, that's a much easier one to
That's right.
tackle, before I step out of my fence and try to fix the world. And so within the confines of therapy, right? Um, let's say that I've taken the courageous step of saying, okay, there's this thing called therapy. I've been beating around the bush about it. I know I need something like that. So, gosh darn it. Okay, I'm gonna take the step of actually seeking out one,
Right.
right?
Right. Right.
Um, what are the hurdles that could keep me from even taking that step one, and how can I safeguard myself from that? And the reason I ask that is because I can make the individual choice to seek out therapy, right? But we all know the effects of peer pressure, family dynamics, and whatnot, that can keep me from, actually going through with the therapy. So, uh, how can I
Well,
navigate those
right.
landmines, so
Let,
to
let
speak?
me just start with one positive thing and then go back to the things that would keep you.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
positive that I think people need to understand is that, if my computer's not working, I'm going to go to a computer technician to get it fixed.
Yeah.
If my car's not working, I'm going to go to an auto mechanic. And I have no shame about that. But if
Right.
my relationship isn't working, why am I feeling shame about talking to somebody who's an expert in helping me get my relationship back on track, or my parenting back on track, or getting in line with expressing my true creativity? So I just
Yeah.
want to say that we go to someone who has a different expertise than we do because we want something to get better. We want,
Right.
and so
Right.
so I want to frame going to a therapist because we want our own emotional well-being to get better. We want to feel more at peace with ourselves. We want to feel more functional in our relationships. We want to make better relationships. We want to get along better with our spouses and children. And that's the reason. And it takes courage in a different way than it takes for me to take my computer to. It doesn't take any courage for me to take my computer to the computer store, but it takes
Right.
courage for me to actually change the way I may be thinking and feeling to make my relationship life better. But it can
Mm.
happen. And so we want to sort of put the positive of what's at stake here out in front. What am I willing to do to have a
Yeah.
better marriage, to have a better
Right.
relationship with my employees? Um, so that's what I want to say is the goal around it, is that we actually improve something dramatically in our lives that's been hurting us and maybe hurting other
Mm.
people as well. The things that keep
Yeah.
people from doing that are, you know, one of the things that I share a lot when I'm talking about my book is that the epidemic of abuse and emotional abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and social abuse is very high in our country. I
Mm.
cannot tell you the number of average people like you and me who have had horrible childhoods on some level, somewhere. Somebody molested them when they were 4, or they molested them for 10 years, or beat
Mm.
them,
Mm.
or locked them in a closet, or bullied them and no one helped them on the playground. The level of abuse and neglect in our society is quite high. And so to talk about that, many people feel like because we still have this narrative, I think, in America a lot, which is better
Mm.
left unsaid. Put the past behind you. Move on. Don't be a whiner. Don't be a crybaby. Don't play the pity
Right. Right.
card. All of these
Yeah.
things we give out as messages to people that makes it hard for people to just say, I'm really in pain. I had a horrible childhood. I was molested. I was beaten. I was the only white kid in a Puerto Rican neighborhood, or the only Puerto Rican in a white neighborhood. And I got bullied to death, beaten up every day on the playground.
Yeah.
We have to make it safe for people to not only feel their pain and move through it, but know that there's a place where you can come out the other side, because the best therapy helps people come out the other side. And the stigma or the narrative that we have that I think is one of the most destructive is, if I go into all that pain and start to cry, I'll never come out the other side. I'm just
Mm.
revisiting my trauma. I'm going to cry an ocean of tears. I'm going to sink into an abyss, and I'm never going to come out. So I don't want to go there. And in all the years I've been a therapist, I have never seen that happen, ever. I have never had a client who sunk into
Okay.
an emotional abyss and didn't come out the other side. In fact, and it may take a while, because some people's trauma is enormous, and it may take a
Right.
while
Right.
to move through it. But in fact, people feel relief at having a safe place just to let that pain out. That in itself
Mm.
is healing. And there's lots of other elements of therapy that are also healing in addition to just the release. But that's
Yeah.
one of the biggest deterrents.
Hmm. Okay, this is nuts. We're 52 minutes in, and I forgot to ask
Mm.
you, how did you end up on this as a psychotherapist?
Very, very honestly, I ended up as a psychotherapist because I had trauma in my childhood. And I
Okay.
didn't remember any of it until I
Mm.
was in my late 30s, and I started to get memories of things that had happened to me when I was very, very young. And it upended my life. I felt like my life was falling apart. I was in so much pain. And I went to
Mm.
therapy, and I began to remember what happened to me, and I began to move through it. And it was a very painful journey, and it was not an easy journey. And not every I went to a number of therapists. Not every therapist was perfect or the ideal
Mm.
person for me, but I
Yeah.
ended up working on my stuff in a place that really was safe for me, and I did
Mm.
make it out the other side. And so I have a very personal attachment to the knowledge that so many people in our world are living in enormous pain that they don't understand. They don't know why they do what they do. They don't know why they react the way they do or make some of the bad choices that they make. And they don't know it's not their fault, that they're not a flawed human being. So when you said earlier, let's come back to the personal, yes, let's come back to the personal, because the more of us that can heal our own wounds, the more we are able to spread that kind of mental health and emotional well-being to the people around us. It does start with us. And none of us are perfect. I will never be perfect in all my relationships, but I have a place to come back to. I know some skills. I have the mindset. If I have an argument with my husband, we have the mindset together that we are committed to come back to repair, even if we're angry at each other. And that is a relationship saver. And what if we had that in government? What if we had that all over the world, that we had the mindset, no matter how big our disagreements are, we were committed to repair of human relations instead of building more bombs?
That is a very powerful insight. I'm a huge proponent of self-analysis / starting here before trying to address what's out there. And what you're saying is one of the fears for people to do therapy is that I don't want to touch on this. I don't want to touch on that. I don't want to revisit that. Those are terrible memories. I don't want to go back there because it's gonna mess up where I am at this stage of life. But what you're saying is, and correct me if this is a good summation, visiting your past, going back to your timeline, yes, it will be painful. Yes, it will be an arduous walk into the past, but you come out on the other side just much, much better. Is that a fair summation?
Yes, and I think what people don't understand, I think I like to use a medical model. If you have an infection that is closed over and it's, the pus is growing under your skin, somebody has to open it up. You have to open it up to get the infection out. It's not going to heal by itself. In fact, it could kill you if it just goes into your bloodstream, right? And our emotions are no different. If we don't, because the thing is, we have this mindset, if I don't talk about it, it'll go away. But it doesn't go away. It actually fuels the way we feel about ourselves, the choices we make, the behaviors that we've role modeled. And it perpetuates the dysfunction that we're already suffering from. So using that medical model in a safe place, in a loving place, in a container where there's some skills, and no judgment of whatever we're going to find in there. A doctor doesn't judge how much pus is in your infection. They open it up and clean it out. And the best psychotherapy helps us open up and clean out what's causing the great disturbances and the pain in our hearts and in our minds and in our behaviors.
Wow, that's another good insight. 2 questions for you, talking about revisiting the past. Can you remember what your favorite song was when you were little?
Yeah, that's so funny. I think it was a song called Tammy, and I can't even tell you the words, but we had this, I remember that we had this talent show when I was a really little girl, and I sang it, and I don't remember it, but other than that, I had another one though. Anyway, I don't know. That was one that came to mind.
Okay. How old were you when that was your favorite song?
I was in grammar school. And then I know that there was another one I had later, and it was called The Yellow Rose of Texas. Where I heard that, no idea. Loved it.
Okay. And what did you want to be when you grew up?
I wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be a writer from when I was really young. Yep. Interesting, huh? So sometimes we just know. Yep.
Yeah. That's amazing. Phyllis, what is, as we're coming to an end here, it's insane that an hour just went by like
I know.
that really flew by. What are the final thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think I want to end with what we were just talking about, which is do your own work. Get help. It's not a sign of weakness. If you're in pain, if you even just want to upgrade the relationships that you're in, if you want to have a better relationship with your kids, or there's something gnawing at you from the past that you keep pushing away, go talk to somebody. I think you'll find that it's an amazing experience, because I just want to reiterate, everything we do to heal ourselves, we generate out into the world around us. If I'm a happier person, if I'm a more peaceful person, if I become a safer person for you to talk to, then that's what I give to the people around me. And there are millions of people around all of us who need exactly that from our brother and sister human beings.
Phyllis, thank you for coming to the Moses Kabandana Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much. That was a great conversation that really did fly by.